Okay, guys, we're here to sum up Chapter 12, Worlds of the 15th Century, with Section 5, Webs of Connection, and Section 6, Preview of Coming Attractions, looking ahead to the modern era, 1500 to the present. Okay, so large-scale political systems brought together culturally different people. The great empires of the 15th century linked these diverse groups across long distances. The Inca were particularly noteworthy for integrating people into their culture and assimilating them. Religion both united and divided far-flung peoples. Common religious culture of Christendom existed, but they were divided into the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox. Buddhism linked people in China, Korea, Tibet, and Japan, and parts of Southeast Asia. And Islam was particularly good at bringing together its people. For example, like through the annual Hajj, but there was still conflict within the Ummah that persisted. And Islam and Buddhism really forged international linkages. Patterns of trade were certainly evident in the 15th century. Trade was going on almost everywhere, and the balance of Afro-Eurasian trade was changing. The Silk Road network was contracting or getting smaller or becoming less important, while the ocean trade in the West Atlantic and the Indian Ocean increased. Improved and larger ships promoted more trade by seas. It was cheaper, especially in the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia. And here's a map that shows you where these different religions, by color, where they're located. And most of you guys already are familiar with this, right? Europe's predominantly Christian. East Asia is predominantly Buddhists. While here in the middle of Central Asia and Northern Africa and even along the eastern coast are the Islamic areas. Of course, and then there's the small little Christian area of Axum right here. And the Coptic church there in Egypt. So, the trade routes also show you, you can see, the less importance of this road and the more importance of all the sea travel, right? And a lot of these are places that Ibn Battuta hit, for example, when he traveled in the Indian Ocean. But this is a great visual that shows you how these people are divided, yet we know there are some empires that linked different groups, and then, of course, where those trade routes are located, or were located. Okay, this is Section 6, a preview of coming attractions, looking ahead to the modern era. No 15th century connections were truly global. Those came only with European expansion in the 16th century. And, the last 500 years, 1500 to 2000, this is inextricable linking of the worlds of Afro-Eurasia, the Americas, and Pacific Oceania. So while the trade networks ran deep and were quite large, the globe was not yet completely connected. And soon the whole world would become linked in what is now an almost inescapable global system. And we'll get into that a little bit more later on. And modern human society emerged first in Europe in the 19th century and then spread throughout the rest of the world. And that core feature was industrialization. And this was accompanied by a massive population increase. And societies favored holders of urban wealth over the rural land-owning elites. So we see a huge rise in the merchant class, which eventually became the middle class. As states became more powerful and intrusive as opposed to empires. There's an opening up of public and political life to more of the population, so there are more opportunities. But there's a self-conscious departure from tradition. Things are changing, and people are realizing these changes and the impact that they'll have. And the Modernity Revolution was essentially just as important as the agricultural revolution thousands of years ago. It introduced new divisions and conflicts within groups of people, new economic inequalities, and also led to destruction of older patterns of human life. And so that's why it's just as important as the agricultural revolution. European technological advances changed methods of production, styles of living, and the ability to project power after the 19th century. And the human population grew exponentially because of this, and the impact of other species on the planet like never before. Cities would get larger and more common. People would be more tied into for-profit methods of production as opposed to sustaining production. And literacy also spread and opened up new perspectives and new ideas into the world. And all these forces made the Second Great Revolution basically since the Agricultural Revolution. And that's this Modernity Revolution. And the modern era saw, the unprecedented rise of Europe and the expansion of Europeans. This is when they take hold. The rest of the world had to decide how to deal with them. And often resistance came to characterize this process. Prominence of Europeans on the global stage, that's what I was just really referring to. And that, it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't over 50 years. It was a 500-year process. But it was really after 1500 when Western Europe became the most innovative, prosperous, powerful, and the most imitated part of the world. We see the spread of European languages and Christian religion throughout the world. And the Europeans were the ones that initiated the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution. And a lot of that has to do with larger numbers of people are becoming literate and have access to greater pieces of literature because of the printing press. And this is also the origin of modern isms like liberalism, nationalism, feminism, socialism. All of these modern isms come into play in the last 500 years, especially on a global stage. And the rest of the world was confronted by these intrusive Europeans, and that's where the resistance came in on how to deal with that process of the rise of Europe. And I love this graph because you see the significance in the change and increase in population. Even from just 1,000, of course, our focus here is 1,500. But you can see a very slow rise in the population. Of course, our dip in the population here because of the Black Death. And then it gradually gets larger, and then we hit 1,800, 1,700, and it just spikes from there. And we reach 1 billion right around 1,800 or so across the globe, of course. And the Industrial Revolution has a large part with that, and the Scientific Revolution, because it's not just a better way of doing some things, like with the Industrial Revolution and better way of producing, but also there are advancements in science and medicine, and that obviously affects the population, and that's why we see that huge spike into the population. And 15 years ago, basically hit 6 billion, and of course, you guys know now there are 7 billion. So just in 15 years, which is right here, we've already gained 1 billion people. And so this is a great visual for you. And that sums up chapter 12, the worlds of the 15th century. This is a great chapter. Hopefully you learned a lot in this chapter and all the different things that are going on in the different parts of the world all at the same time. China and Europe they were discussed together several times in this chapter, most notably describing the developmental arc immediately before the rise of a global system. So think about whether the early Ming Dynasty represents a time similar to the European Renaissance, or whether Europe had the conditions similar to China when it came to cross-ocean exploration. That's something to think about. And I will see you guys again next time.